The first thing Grace Miller heard was the sound of a wine glass shattering against marble, not loud enough to drown out the rain beating against the windows of Vale House, but loud enough to silence 40 of the most dangerous men in New York. For one breath, no one moved. Red wine ran down the front of Adrian Vale's black suit like blood. Grace stood in front of him with an empty silver tray trembling in her hands, her face drained of color, her heart pounding so hard she could barely hear the storm outside. Around her, the dining hall had turned deathly still. Men who had ordered executions over quieter insults stared at her, as if she had already become a body waiting to be removed. No servant touched Adrian Vale. No servant spoke to him. No servant made him look human. And Grace had just spilled wine across his chest in front of every rival mafia family on the East Coast. Someone at the far end of the table laughed once, low and cruel. "Well?" Lorenzo De Luca said, leaning back in his chair. "That girl just ended her own life." Grace lowered her eyes, not because she was weak, but because fear had locked her bones in place. She knew the rules of Vale House. She had been taught them the first morning she arrived at the iron gates. Keep your head down. Do not look at the owner, unless spoken to. Do not enter the West Wing. Do not ask why there are armed men in the gardens. And above all, never embarrass Mr. Vale. Adrian Vale slowly looked down at the stains spreading across his shirt. He did not shout. He did not strike her. He did not even blink. He simply removed his jacket, handed it to the nearest guard, and looked at Grace with eyes so calm they frightened her more than rage ever could. Then he pulled out the chair beside him. "Sit," he said. The room froze harder. Grace stared at him, certain she had misunderstood. Adrian's voice dropped, quiet enough to feel intimate, powerful enough to command every soul in the hall. "Grace, sit down." The sound of her name in his mouth changed the air. She had never told him her name. At least, she had never thought he knew it. Her legs moved before her mind could stop them. She sat in the chair beside the most feared man in New York, while every mafia boss in the room watched with open disbelief. Adrian took the plate meant for him, lifted the silver cover, and served her the first portion himself. A rival underboss half rose from his seat. Adrian did not look at him. "Every man in this room," he said, placing the plate before Grace, "will remain seated." No one moved again. Grace could feel every stare cutting into her skin. She could feel the danger blooming around her like smoke. In one impossible moment, she had gone from invisible housekeeper to the woman Adrian Vale had publicly chosen to protect. And in their world, protection was possession. Lorenzo De Luca's smile faded. Adrian leaned close enough that only Grace could hear him. "Eat," he murmured. "They need to believe you are not afraid." Grace's fingers curled around the edge of the table. "What have you done?" she whispered. His eyes stayed on the room. "What I should have done the first night you came here." Grace did not know then that the entire criminal underworld would be hunting her by sunrise. She did not know that hidden cameras had watched her since the day she entered the estate. She did not know that the man sitting beside her had known her real name long before she buried it. All she knew was that Adrian Vale had just turned a mistake into a declaration. And every man in that room understood one thing. The housekeeper belonged to him now. Grace Miller had come to Vale House 6 months earlier with 2 suitcases, $300 in cash, and a lie printed on a government-issued identity card. To the estate manager, she was a quiet 28-year-old woman from Albany, with cleaning experience and no family nearby. To the other servants, she was polite, private, and forgettable. To the armed men who patrolled the grounds, she was another invisible worker moving through the mansion like a ghost. That invisibility had saved her life before. She had learned to disappear after her mother was murdered in a Brooklyn laundromat 12 years earlier. The official report called it a robbery gone wrong. Grace knew better. Her mother, Elena Miller, had worked as a nurse in a private clinic that treated men who did not use hospitals. One night, she came home shaking, packed a bag, and told Grace they were leaving New York before morning. They never made it. Grace survived because her mother shoved her into a storage closet and told her not to breathe. She still remembered the voices. One man begging, one man laughing, one man saying, "The child saw nothing." After that, witness protection swallowed her life. New name, new schools, new cities, no social media, no old photographs, no attachments that could be traced. But protection faded when budgets changed, when agents retired, when old cases became cold. By 28, Grace was alone with a file of warnings and a past no one wanted to reopen. Vale House was supposed to be temporary. A job with room and board. A place rich enough to pay well and secretive enough not to ask questions. The mansion sat behind black gates in North Shore, Long Island, all limestone walls, rain-dark gardens, and windows that glowed at night like watchful eyes. The staff lived in the East Wing, far from the owner's private rooms. Grace cleaned guest suites, polished silver, arranged flowers, and pretended not to notice when men arrived at midnight and left before dawn. She saw Adrian Vale only from a distance. Once on the staircase, dressed in black, speaking softly to a man who trembled as if he were facing a judge. Once in the rain, standing beside a row of black SUVs, his face turned toward the servants' entrance like he already knew she was watching. And once in the library at 2 a.m., when Grace entered to return a misplaced book and found him sitting alone by the fire, staring at a photograph in his hand. He looked up. Grace stopped breathing. For 3 seconds, neither of them moved. Then he said, "You should not be in this room." She lowered her eyes and stepped back. "I'm sorry, sir." His gaze moved over her face with a strange intensity. Not lust, not anger, something colder and more dangerous. Recognition. "Do you always apologize for entering rooms that were left unlocked?" Grace looked up before she could stop herself. "Only when the owner looks like he might punish me for it." The silence that followed should have terrified her. Instead, Adrian's mouth almost softened. "Almost. Go to bed, Grace." She left shaken, wondering how he knew her name. After that night, small things changed. The broken heater in her room was repaired before she reported it. A guard began walking her to the staff quarters when shifts ended late. When a cook grabbed her wrist during an argument, he was fired before sunset and escorted off the property with bloodless efficiency. No one explained why. Grace told herself not to imagine kindness in a place built on fear. Adrian Vale was not kind. He was a man people obeyed, because refusing him was worse than death. He owned ports, hotels, private security firms, judges, senators, and debts that reached into families who would never admit they knew his name. He did not raise his voice, because he never needed to. His calm was the warning. So when Grace spilled wine on him during the annual gathering, she expected the calm to become lethal. Instead, he served her dinner. The banquet continued for 20 minutes after that, but no one tasted the food. Grace sat beside Adrian with her spine rigid and her hands folded in her lap. The plate before her might as well have been a loaded weapon. Every time she lifted her fork, someone watched. Every time Adrian filled her water glass, the room tightened with disbelief. Lorenzo De Luca studied her from across the table. He was older than Adrian, silver-haired, elegant, with eyes that carried rot beneath charm. His family controlled parts of Queens and Atlantic City, and rumor said he had once burned a rival's yacht with the rival still aboard. He smiled at Grace like he was trying to remember where he had seen her. Adrian noticed. His hand rested near his wineglass, relaxed. But Grace felt the shift in him. A predator recognizing another predator. "You surprise us, Vale," Lorenzo said. "All these years, no wife, no mistress, no weakness. And now this." Adrian cut into his untouched steak. "She spilled wine. She humiliated you." "No," Adrian said calmly. "You mistook an accident for disrespect because you enjoy killing people who cannot fight back." The room went even colder. Lorenzo's smile sharpened. "And can she fight back?" Grace felt Adrian glance at her. "She can sit in a room full of cowards and keep her hands steady," he said. "That is more than most men here can do." Grace's throat tightened. It was not softness. It was worse. It was a claim made in front of wolves. When the dinner finally ended, Adrian stood. Every man rose with him. Grace tried to stand too, but his hand touched the back of her chair. Not her skin. Never her skin. Still, the gesture trapped her in place. "Stay." The word moved through her like heat and warning. Guests filed out beneath crystal chandeliers, whispering in Italian, Russian, English, and the language of men calculating power. Lorenzo was last. He paused beside Grace's chair and looked down at her. "You have interesting eyes, sweetheart." Grace felt her stomach drop. Adrian stepped between them so quickly she did not see him move. "You are standing too close." Lorenzo lifted both hands. "Careful, Adrian." The world already knows you care. Adrian smiled then. Not warmly, not kindly. It was the first smile Grace had ever seen on his face, and it made every guard in the room look away. If the world touches her, Adrian said, I will remind it what fear used to mean. Lorenzo left without another word. Only when the doors closed did Grace push back from the table. What was that? She demanded. Adrian turned to her. The dining hall seemed too large around them, the candles burning low, the storm pressing against the windows. Without the rival families, without the audience, he looked less like a king and more like a man standing at the edge of something he hated needing. That, he said, was me saving your life. Grace laughed once, breathless and furious. No, that was you painting a target on my back. The target was already there. Herr Anger felt it. Adrian walked toward the windows, hands in his pockets, his stained shirt open at the collar beneath his vest. Grace noticed the wine had soaked through to his skin. She should not have noticed. What does that mean? He did not answer. Mr. Vale. His eyes returned to hers. Adrian, he said. She shook her head. No. Something unreadable crossed his face. You say my name when you are frightened. I am frightened. You should be. Grace stepped toward him despite every survival instinct screaming not to. Do you know me? Adrian's silence was an answer. A crack of thunder shook the glass. Grace whispered, How? Before he could speak, one of his guards entered, pale and tense. Sir. The DeLuca convoy stopped 2 miles from the estate. One vehicle turned around. Adrian's entire expression emptied. Grace saw the Mafia Boss return in full. Lock the house. The guard nodded. Adrian looked at Grace. You will come with me. I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what is happening. The lights flickered. A distant alarm began to pulse through the mansion. Adrian crossed the room, close enough that Grace had to tilt her face up. He still did not touch her, but the air between them felt dangerous. Grace, he said quietly, men who have wanted you dead for 12 years just saw me serve you dinner. Her blood turned cold. 12 years? His eyes darkened. Yes. The lights went out. For half a second, the mansion vanished into blackness. Then gunfire erupted at the front gate. Adrian moved instantly. He grabbed Grace's wrist and pulled her behind him as the windows exploded inward, rain and glass spraying across the dining hall. She screamed, but his body was already shielding hers. Guards rushed in. Muzzle flashes tore through the dark. The chandeliers swung overhead like dying stars. Grace stumbled against Adrian's back, shaking. He looked over his shoulder once, not at the attackers, at her. Stay behind me. There was no softness in his voice. Only command. Only terror buried so deep it came out as control. He dragged her through a hidden panel behind the fireplace, into a narrow passage lit by emergency red lights. The sound of gunfire faded behind stone walls, replaced by her panicked breathing and the hard rhythm of his footsteps. Where are we going? She gasped. Somewhere they cannot reach you. They who? Adrian stopped so suddenly she nearly collided with him. He turned in the red light, his face carved in shadow. The men who killed your mother. Grace could not breathe. The storage closet. The blood. Her mother's hand over her mouth. The voice saying the child saw nothing. Her knees nearly gave out. Adrian caught her before she fell. This time he touched her. One hand at her waist, one around her arm. Firm. Controlled. Not tender, but not careless. Grace looked down at his hands as if they were another shock. He released her immediately, as if touching her had cost him something. You knew, she whispered. You knew who I was. Yes. Since when? Before you came to my house. My house? Her voice broke. I applied for this job. No, Adrian said. You were placed here. The passage seemed to tilt. Grace backed away from him. You brought me here? I brought you where I could keep you alive. That is not an answer. It is the only one that matters tonight. A blast shook the walls. Dust fell from the ceiling. Grace flinched. Adrian's jaw tightened. We move. The tunnel ended beneath the garage, where black SUVs waited with engines running. Men in body armor stood ready. Grace recognized none of them from the household staff. These were not guards. These were soldiers. Adrian guided her into the back seat and slid in beside her. The convoy tore out through a concealed exit beneath the estate, tires screaming over wet pavement. Behind them, Vale House burned in patches of orange light against the storm. Grace stared through the rear window at the place she had slept for 6 months. You ruined my life, she said. Adrian did not deny it. Your life was already built on someone else's lie. She turned on him. And what is yours built on? For the first time that night, his calm cracked. Blood, he said, and one mistake I have spent 12 years trying to undo. The safe house was not a house at all, but a penthouse above a private hotel in Manhattan with mirrored elevators, silent staff, and windows overlooking a city drowning in rain. Grace was taken through a service entrance, surrounded by men with weapons beneath tailored coats. By dawn, every news channel in New York was showing footage of smoke rising from the Vale estate. The headline called it a suspected gas explosion. Grace stood barefoot in the penthouse living room, wrapped in a borrowed robe, watching lies become public record. Adrian stood behind her, speaking on the phone in Italian so softly, it sounded almost intimate. He had changed into a clean black shirt, but there was a thin cut across his cheek from flying glass. Grace hated that she noticed, hated more that she wanted to ask if it hurt. When he ended the call, she turned. I want the truth. You are safer not knowing all of it. I am done being protected by men who decide what I get to survive. That landed. Adrian looked at her for a long moment, then walked to a locked cabinet built into the wall. He pressed his thumb to a hidden scanner. The cabinet opened to reveal files, photographs, and a small velvet box. He removed a folder and placed it on the table. Grace saw her mother's face first. Younger, smiling, alive. Her chest tightened. Adrian remained standing. Your mother treated my father after an assassination attempt. During that treatment, she discovered he had not been attacked by rivals. He had been poisoned from inside our own family. Grace slowly sat down. She kept records. She kept proof. Names, payments, medical samples. Enough to expose the alliance between my uncle and Lorenzo De Luca. Grace looked up. Your uncle? Matteo Vale. He raised me after my father died. He also ordered the murder of your mother when she refused to hand over the evidence. The room blurred. Grace pressed a hand to her mouth. And you? I was 26, Adrian said, old enough to command men, young enough to believe the wrong ones. By the time I learned the truth, Elena Miller was dead. Your protection file had vanished, and every person who knew where you were had either been paid or buried. Grace stood so quickly the chair scraped backward. So you watched me? Yes. For years? Yes. Her eyes filled with angry tears. That is not protection. That is obsession. Adrian's face hardened. I know. The honesty disarmed her more than denial would have. Grace stepped closer, trembling. Why didn't you tell me? Because you would have run. I had the right to run. Yes, he said quietly. And I did not have the strength to let you. The silence between them became unbearable. Grace slapped him. The sound cracked across the penthouse. Every guard outside the room shifted. Adrian did not move. He did not touch his face. He simply looked at her with something dark and wounded burning behind his eyes. Do not ever, Grace whispered, confuse controlling me with saving me. His voice was low. I never confused the two. I am guilty of both. She wanted to hate him cleanly. It would have been easier if he were only a monster. But monsters did not keep photographs of dead nurses in locked cabinets. Monsters did not look like men being punished by the one person whose forgiveness they had no right to want. Grace turned away. I want to leave. No. She spun back. His expression was cold again, but his eyes were not. You can hate me from inside this penthouse, he said. You can scream, break every glass I own. Refuse to speak to me for the rest of your life. But tonight, you do not leave. Because I belong to you now? His jaw tightened. Because Lorenzo believes you are the last living key to evidence that can destroy him. I don't have evidence. You may not know that you do. Grace remembered her mother's final words before shoving her into the closet. If anything happens, remember the song. For 12 years, Grace had thought grief made the memory strange. Her mother had sung to her every night as a child, an old lullaby in Spanish about a blackbird and a locked door. Grace had never understood why her mother said it while men broke into their apartment. She looked at Adrian. He saw the change in her face. What do you remember? Before she could answer, his phone buzzed. He looked down. Then all warmth vanished. A photo appeared on the screen. Grace's younger sister, not by blood, by witness protection. Lily, the little girl placed with Grace in a foster-safe home years earlier, the closest thing she had left to family. She was now a kindergarten teacher in Vermont. The message beneath the photo read, "Bring the housekeeper to St. Agnes Church by midnight, or the child pays for the mother's sins." Grace reached for the phone with shaking hands. "No." Adrian caught her wrist. "No one touched her. You don't know that." His eyes burned. "I do." The possessiveness in his voice frightened her, but for the first time, it also steadied her. That night, Grace learned what it meant to be protected by Adrian Vale. It was not comfort. It was not reassurance. It was war moving quietly through expensive rooms. Phones rang. Men disappeared. Helicopters lifted from rooftops. A private jet was redirected from Miami. Judges were woken. A priest was bribed. A police captain was threatened without a single raised voice. Adrian stood at the center of it all like a storm in a tailored suit, issuing orders with lethal calm. Grace watched from the hallway, wrapped in his coat, because the penthouse felt too cold. At one point, a young guard brought coffee and addressed her as Miss Miller. Grace looked up. Adrian's head turned slowly. The guard went pale. "Leave," Adrian said. When they were alone, Grace folded her arms. "You cannot scare everyone who says my name." "I can. That is not a personality. It has worked. Not on me." His eyes moved over her face. "No," he said softly. "Not on you." The moment stretched too long. He was standing close enough that she could see exhaustion beneath his control. Grace wondered how long it had been since anyone saw him tired. She wondered why the thought hurt. Adrian lifted a hand as if to touch the sleeve of the coat around her shoulders, then stopped before his fingers reached the fabric. Grace noticed. So did he. His hand lowered. "We found Lily," he said. "Alive. Shaken. My men are moving her." Grace exhaled, tears rising before she could stop them. "Thank you." His expression shuttered. "Do not thank me for cleaning blood from a floor I helped stain. You didn't kill my mother." "No," he said. "But my name opened the door." At midnight, Grace went to St. Agnes Church anyway. Not because Adrian allowed it, because she forced his hand. "If Lorenzo wants me," she said, standing in the penthouse bedroom while Adrian blocked the door, "then use me." "No. You need proof. I need answers. Lily will never be safe while he thinks I know something." "No. You do not get to put me in a glass box and call it love." The word hit them both. Love. Neither of them moved. Adrian's voice became dangerous. "Choose your words carefully." "Why?" Grace stepped closer. "Because if I call it what it is, you'll have to admit you're not just protecting me." His eyes darkened with something almost violent. "You think I do not know what I am becoming?" Grace swallowed. "I think you're terrified of it." He laughed once, without humor. "I have buried men without losing sleep. I know. But if you walk into that church and do not come back out..." He stopped. The unfinished sentence was more intimate than a confession. Grace's anger softened, just enough to hurt. "Then make sure I come back out." St. Agnes sat abandoned between two redevelopment towers in Brooklyn. Its stained glass cracked. Its doors chained open as if even God had left in a hurry. Rain slicked the steps. Fog curled around the streetlights. Black SUVs waited in the dark like beasts. Grace wore a wire beneath a simple black dress. Adrian stood in front of her in the back of the SUV, fastening a tiny transmitter at her collar with steady hands. His knuckles brushed her throat once. Both of them went still. "Sorry," he said. The apology sounded unfamiliar in his mouth. Grace looked at him. "Are you?" His eyes lifted to hers. "For many things." The driver opened the door. The moment broke. Inside the church, candles burned along the aisle, though no one had lit them by hand. Lorenzo De Luca stood near the altar, flanked by men with guns lowered but ready. Beside him stood Matteo Vale, Adrian's uncle, older now, elegant, smiling with the warmth of a family portrait hiding rot behind the frame. Grace's blood chilled. She had seen him before. Not in Adrian's files. In her nightmares. He was the voice that said the child saw nothing. Matteo smiled at her. "But she did see something, didn't she?" Grace's knees weakened. Adrian's voice spoke through the hidden earpiece, low and controlled. "Breathe." Lorenzo looked amused. "Did my nephew send you in wearing his coat and his courage?" Grace held his stare. "He sent me in because cowards like you only speak when you think a woman is alone." Matteo laughed softly. "There is her mother." The words cut deep. Grace forced herself forward. What did she hide? Matteo's smile faded a little. You truly don't know. Lorenzo stepped closer. She left you a song. Grace's breath caught. Adrian's voice in her ear sharpened. Grace. Lorenzo smiled. Sing it. No. Matteo's expression hardened. Your mother encoded account numbers into that lullaby. Locations, names, access keys. She thought no one would torture a child for a nursery song. Grace felt sick. Her mother had not left her evidence. She had made her the evidence. Lorenzo raised his hand. One of his men dragged Lily from behind the altar. Grace screamed her name. Lily was crying, gagged, wrists bound, eyes wide with terror. Adrian's voice vanished from the earpiece. Static. Matteo looked toward the shadows. Your lover's signal is dead. Did he not tell you I taught him every tunnel under this city? Grace stared at Lily. The world narrowed. For the first time, fear became rage. You want the song? Grace whispered. Lorenzo nodded. Grace began to sing. Her voice trembled at first, soft and broken beneath the ruined church ceiling. The lullaby moved through the candlelight, through dust, through memory. She saw her mother's face, saw blood on tile, saw a hand pressed over her mouth. But as she sang, she noticed something else. Adrian had once told her the safest lies were hidden in plain sight. The fourth verse had never belonged. Her mother added it only on the night she died. Grace changed one word. Matteo's eyes widened. He knew. Before he could shout, the church doors exploded inward. Adrian Vale walked through smoke and shattered wood with his men behind him, his black coat soaked with rain, his face calm in a way that promised ruin. Gunfire erupted. Candles toppled. Men screamed. Grace dropped to the floor as Adrian moved through chaos toward her with terrifying focus. A man aimed at Grace. Adrian shot him before Grace could blink. Lorenzo grabbed Lily and dragged her toward the side chapel. Grace lunged, but Matteo caught her by the hair. She cried out. Adrian saw it. Something in him broke. Not loudly, not dramatically. His eyes simply changed. The man who crossed the church was not a nephew, not a boss, not a king. He was obsession given flesh. Matteo pressed a knife to Grace's throat. Stop, he ordered. Adrian stopped. Rain blew through the broken doors behind him. Matteo smiled. You always had your father's weakness. One woman, and the whole empire becomes negotiable. Adrian's gun lowered. Grace stared at him, horrified. No. Adrian's eyes never left hers. You asked me not to put you in a glass box, he said. So I won't lie to you now. Matteo tightened his grip. Adrian continued calmly. I would burn the empire for you. Grace's tears spilled. That is not what I asked. No, he said, but it is what is true. Then he dropped the gun. Matteo laughed. Grace understood in the same instant. Adrian moved his eyes not to her, but to the candle stand beside them. She kicked backward with everything she had. The knife sliced her skin, but Matteo lost balance. Adrian moved. A shot rang out from the balcony. Matteo fell. Adrian caught Grace before she hit the floor. His hands pressed to her neck, his calm gone for the first time. Look at me. I'm okay, she whispered, though blood warmed her skin. Look at me. She did. His face was inches from hers, rain in his hair, smoke behind him, fury and fear tearing through every wall he had built. I had you, she whispered. His breath shook. No, he said. You saved yourself. I just killed the man who touched you. Lily was rescued before Lorenzo could reach the tunnel, but Lorenzo escaped, and by morning, the world knew Grace Miller's face. Not from police reports, from a leaked photograph taken inside the banquet hall. Adrian Vale serving dinner to his housekeeper, while every Mafia family watched. The captions spread across every underground channel before sunrise. Vale's woman. Grace woke in a private hospital suite with stitches at her throat, and Adrian sitting beside her bed, still in the same clothes from the church. There was dried blood on his cuff. His eyes were open, fixed on her hand as if he had been watching to make sure it did not disappear. You need sleep, she rasped. He looked up. So do you. I was unconscious. That is not sleep. She almost smiled, then winced. He leaned forward instantly. Fine. A little. He reached for the call button. Grace caught his wrist. He froze at the touch. Don't, she said. Stay. The word changed the room. Adrian slowly sat back down. Grace did not release his wrist. For a while, they simply listened to the machines, the rain tapping against the hospital windows, the distant city moving beyond bulletproof glass. "Lorenzo will come again," Grace said. "Yes. You won't hide that from me." "No. You won't make decisions for me?" "A pause. I will try." Grace gave him a look. His mouth almost moved. Almost a smile. "I will fail less often," he said. "That's the most romantic thing you've ever said." "I am not romantic." "No," Grace whispered. "You're terrifying." His eyes lowered. "And yet you asked me to stay." She looked away. "I'm still deciding whether that was a mistake." Adrian leaned closer, slowly enough that she could stop him. He did not kiss her. He touched his forehead gently to the back of her hand. It was more dangerous than a kiss. More honest. More vulnerable than a man like him should ever allow himself to be. "I have made you a target," he said. Grace's fingers tightened around his. "You made me visible." His eyes lifted. "I don't know if I can forgive you for the rest." "I know. But I know this." Her voice softened. "When everyone expected me to die, you pulled out a chair." Something flickered across his face. Pain, hunger, devotion, denial, losing its final war. "I should have done more. You did something no one in that room could understand." "What?" "You treated me like I mattered." Adrian looked at her as if those words cut deeper than any blade. Outside the suite, men argued in hushed voices. The Mafia war had not ended. Lorenzo was alive. The evidence hidden inside Grace's memory had begun unraveling bank accounts, judges, shipping routes, and old murders. Families were choosing sides. Newspapers were circling. Police wanted statements. Enemies wanted blood. But inside that room, Adrian Vale sat beside a hospital bed, holding the hand of a woman who had once polished his silver, without looking him in the eye. 3 weeks later, Grace returned to Vale House. The estate was still scarred by fire. Windows boarded, gardens torn by tires, marble floors under repair. Staff lined the entrance hall when she walked in, silent and uncertain, as if unsure whether to bow, apologize, or run. Adrian entered behind her. No one spoke. Grace looked at the dining hall doors. The same room, the same chandeliers, the same long table where her life had changed because her hands shook and a glass slipped. "Open them," she said. Adrian studied her. "Are you sure? No more locked rooms?" He nodded once. The doors opened. The dining hall had been restored, but Adrian had changed one thing. The chair beside his seat remained pulled out, waiting. Grace looked at it, then at him. "You're very dramatic." "I was told romance required effort." "Who told you that?" "No one who survived giving advice." She laughed softly before she could stop herself. The sound moved through the hall like sunlight entering a crypt. Adrian stared at her, not smiling. Not yet, but close. Then one of his men entered, tense. "Sir, de Luca sent un message." Adrian's expression hardened. Grace took the envelope before he could. Inside was a photograph of the banquet hall, taken from the night he served her dinner. Across it, Lorenzo had written, "The next meal will be her last." Grace felt the old fear rise. Then Adrian stepped beside her, not in front of her, beside her. She looked at him. He had learned. Slowly, painfully, imperfectly. But he had learned. "What do we do?" she asked. Adrian's eyes stayed on the photograph. "We invite him to dinner." The final confrontation took place 1 week later at the Meridian Club, an underground casino hidden beneath a luxury hotel in Midtown. Velvet walls, gold lights, smoke curling over poker tables, a room full of criminals pretending they were not afraid. Grace entered on Adrian's arm wearing a black silk dress and the scar at her throat uncovered. The room went silent again, but this time, Grace did not lower her eyes. Lorenzo sat at the center table, smiling as if he had already won. Around him gathered the remaining families, men who had come to see whether Adrian Vale would surrender power for a woman. Adrian pulled out Grace's chair. A murmur moved through the room. Grace sat. Then Adrian did what had started the war. He served her dinner. Slowly, calmly, publicly. Lorenzo's smile died. "You learn nothing," he said. Adrian poured Grace water. "I learned exactly who flinches when she is treated with respect." Grace looked across the table. "You wanted my mother's song," she said. "You should have listened more carefully." Screens around the casino flickered on. Bank transfers, names, recordings, medical files. The full evidence Elena Miller had hidden through melody, memory, and one daughter's survival. Panic spread across the room. Several men stood. Adrian's voice cut through them. Every man in this room will remain seated. History repeated itself. Only now, Grace understood the power of silence. Federal agents moved in through the exits. Adrian had not called them out of goodness. He had called them because Lorenzo's empire needed to die publicly, legally, permanently. Men who had escaped bullets for decades were dragged from velvet chairs beneath golden light. Lorenzo reached for a hidden gun. Grace saw it first. Adrian turned, but Lorenzo fired. Adrian shoved Grace down and took the shot meant for her. The room exploded. Grace hit the floor beneath him, his body shielding hers, his blood warm against her hands. Men screamed. Glass shattered. Adrian's guards opened fire. Lorenzo fell backward against the table, his white shirt blooming red. Grace pressed both hands to Adrian's wound. No. Adrian looked up at her, pale but conscious. Are you hurt? She laughed through tears. You were shot and you're asking me that? Yes. You are impossible. His hand lifted, shaking, and touched her face at last. No hesitation. No stopping himself. Just his fingers against her cheek as if he had finally run out of reasons to deny what had been true from the beginning. I was dead long before he fired, Adrian whispered. You are the first thing that made me want otherwise. Grace bent over him, her forehead touching his. You don't get to say that like goodbye. His eyes held hers. Then tell me to stay. She cried harder. Stay. So he did. Months later, snow fell over New York in quiet silver sheets. Vale House no longer felt like a fortress, though guards still walked the gates and black SUVs still waited beneath bare trees. The West Wing had been opened. The staff ate at the main table once a week, awkwardly at first, then with growing laughter. Grace had turned one of the old guest houses into a shelter for women disappearing from dangerous men. Funded by money Adrian took from every family that had once hunted her. He never called it charity. Grace never let him call it strategy. On the first anniversary of the dinner, Adrian found her alone in the dining hall at dusk. Candles burned low, snow pressed softly against the windows. She stood beside the chair he had pulled out for her that night, fingers resting on its carved back. You're thinking about leaving, he said. Grace turned. I'm thinking about how strange it is to survive something and still miss the version of yourself who didn't know it was coming. Adrian walked toward her. He moved slower now. The gunshot had left a scar beneath his ribs and a stiffness he pretended not to feel. Grace noticed every time. I can give you distance, he said. A house. A new name. Anything. She looked at him. Would you let me go? The question hurt him. She saw it, but he answered, yes. That was when Grace knew the man who had once confused possession with protection had changed in the only way that mattered. She stepped closer. And if I stay? His control thinned. Then I spend the rest of my life earning what I took from yours. Grace touched his chest, right over the scar. You can start with dinner. His eyes searched hers. Slowly, Adrian Vale smiled. Not the cold smile that made enemies tremble. Not the dangerous smile he wore before ruin. A real one. Small. Rare. Unprotected. Grace's heart broke open at the sight of it. He pulled out her chair. She sat. He served her dinner. And this time, no one in the room was silent because they were afraid. They were silent because the most feared mafia boss in New York had finally become human, in front of the only woman who had ever dared to look at him and demand more than protection. Outside, snow covered the city that had once hunted her. Inside, candlelight warmed the table where everything had begun with spilled wine, a trembling hand, and a man too dangerous to love choosing, in front of the whole underworld, to serve her first.